Story 1. The passenger who wasn't there. I've picked up my fair share of hitchhikers over the years. Most of them are harmless. They've got places to go, just like me, and I figure a ride is the least I can offer for someone stranded on the side of the road. But this guy was different. He was the first one to make me want to lock my doors, put the pedal to the floor, and never look back. It was just past midnight, and I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere, driving a long stretch of highway that cut through endless desert. The kind of place where the stars seem closer, but the darkness feels heavier. The hum of my engine was the only sound, and the road was empty except for my headlights carving through the void. I saw him standing on the shoulder long before I got to him, a tall figure silhouetted in my high beams, one hand sticking out with a thumb raised. He wasn't waving it around or anything, just holding it up stiffly like he was too tired to care if anyone stopped. My gut told me to keep driving. Something about him seemed off. He didn't look ragged or desperate like most hitchhikers. He was wearing a long coat, dark and clean, and his head was bowed slightly, so I couldn't see his face. Just the shape of him, standing there in the middle of the night, gave me this uneasy feeling I couldn't shake. But I stopped. I don't even know why. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe I didn't want to spend the next 50 miles convincing myself I wasn't the kind of guy who leaves people stranded. I rolled down the passenger window and leaned over. "Where are you headed?" He didn't answer right away. Slowly, he turned his head toward me, and even then, I couldn't make out his face. It was shadowed, like the brim of a hat that wasn't there was blocking it from view. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and flat. "Just up the road." He didn't say where exactly, but before I could think better of it, I unlocked the door. He climbed in without a word, settling into the seat with this deliberate, unnatural stillness. The cab felt colder with him in it. I cranked the heater, but it didn't seem to make a difference. I tried to strike up some small talk, break the tension, but all I got were short, clipped answers. "Been out here long?" "A while." "Where are you coming from?" "Doesn't matter." "What's your name?" Silence. He didn't ask me any questions, didn't seem curious about where I was headed or why I'd stopped for him. He just stared out the window, his face half hidden in the shadows, his hands resting on his knees like he was waiting for something. About 10 minutes in, the weird stuff started happening. First, it was the radio. I always keep it on low, just some old country station to keep me company, but the second he got in the truck, it started cutting out. Static crackled over the music, and then the volume shot up on its own, blasting through the speakers. I fumbled with the knob, turning it off completely, but the static kept going, faint and eerie, like a whisper in the background. Next, it was the mirrors. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement in the side mirrors, shadows shifting along the edges of my trailer. At first, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me, but then I saw something. A shape, quick and darting, like someone running alongside the truck. I glanced at my passenger, but he didn't react. He just kept staring out the window like he didn't notice or didn't care. The noises started after that. A faint thumping from the trailer, like something heavy shifting around back there. I was hauling a load of industrial equipment. Nothing that should have been moving. The sound grew louder, more deliberate, like fists pounding on metal. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to focus on the road, but my nerves were shot. The shadows in the mirrors were darting faster now, flickering in and out of sight. The static on the radio had turned into faint whispers, overlapping and incomprehensible, but undeniably there. And then I looked over, and he was gone. The passenger seat was empty. The door hadn't opened, the seatbelt was still buckled, and there was no way he could have just disappeared. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop on the side of the road. My headlights illuminated the empty highway ahead, and I jumped out of the cab, flashlight in hand, to check the trailer. The pounding had stopped. I unlatched the doors and threw them open, half expecting to find someone or something inside, but the trailer was exactly how I'd left it. Nothing out of place. No sign of movement. That's when I saw it. In the reflection of my flashlight on the metal walls, I caught a glimpse of a face. His face, smiling. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just empty darkness and the sound of the wind. Shaking, I climbed back into the cab and locked the doors. My hands were trembling as I started the engine and pulled back onto the road, determined to get as far away from that spot as possible. But it wasn't over. A few miles later, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and there he was, sitting in the dark trailer, surrounded by faces. Dozens of them, pale and hollow-eyed, staring straight at me. I slammed on the brakes again, but this time the truck didn't stop. The brakes were unresponsive, the engine roaring as the speedometer climbed. The faces in the trailer were still there, pressing closer to the glass, and that's when I saw my own reflection among them. I wasn't sitting in the driver's seat anymore. I was with them, smiling. The last thing I remember is the sound of laughter, low, cold, and inhuman, filling the cab as everything went dark. I don't even know why I'm writing this. If you're out there driving the highways, just don't pick up hitchhikers. Not all of them are looking for a ride. Story 2. The CB radio signal. There's a rule among truckers. If someone calls for help over the CB radio, you answer. It's just one of those unspoken codes we live by, because out here, on the long, lonely stretches of highway, sometimes your fellow drivers are all you've got. I've answered dozens of calls over the years, flat tires, engine troubles, even a couple of medical emergencies. But after what happened that night, I'll never respond again. It was late November, and I was driving through the Rockies, hauling a load of building supplies to a construction site 2 states over. Snow was falling steadily, dusting the road and clinging to my windshield despite the wipers working overtime. The wind howled through the trees on either side of the narrow pass, and the occasional gust made my trailer sway just enough to keep me on edge. The CB radio crackled to life just as I was rounding a particularly tight curve. "Help!" A faint voice pleaded through the static. I adjusted the volume, thinking I'd misheard. "Anyone out there? I'm stuck, broken down. Need help." The signal was weak, garbled, like whoever was speaking was just barely within range. "Copy that," I replied, picking up the mic. "This is westbound 490. What's your location?" There was a pause, then more static. "Mile marker, 58. Please hurry." I frowned, glancing at the green mile marker signs that whizzed by on the roadside. I just passed marker 56, which meant whoever was calling for help was only a couple of miles ahead. "Hang tight," I said into the mic. "I'm on my way." No response. The snow was coming down heavier now, and the road was getting worse. My tires crunched over the icy asphalt as I eased around another curve, my headlights cutting through the swirling flakes. I reached mile marker 58 and slowed to a crawl, scanning the roadside for any sign of a broken-down truck. At first, I didn't see anything, just snow-covered trees and the dark void of the mountain on my left. But then I spotted the tire tracks. They veered off the road sharply, disappearing over the edge of the ravine. My stomach dropped. I pulled over and killed the engine, the sudden silence almost deafening after hours of driving. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped out into the freezing air, my boots crunching in the snow. I followed the tire tracks to the edge of the ravine and peered down. The wreckage was about 20 feet below, partially buried in snow and tangled in the trees. It was a truck cab, its headlights faintly glowing through the storm. The front end was smashed, the windshield shattered, but the door was closed, and there was no movement inside. "Hello?" I called, cupping my hands around my mouth. No answer. I fished the CB mic from my pocket and pressed the button. "This is westbound 490. I'm at your location. Are you still with me?" Static. Then, "Thank you for stopping." The voice was clearer now, no longer distorted by the weak signal. It sounded close. Too close. I turned, shining my flashlight around the road and the trees, but there was no one there. "Are you in the truck?" I asked, staring back down at the wreckage. The voice didn't answer. Instead, the CB crackled again, followed by a long, shuddering breath. "You shouldn't have stopped," the voice said, low and flat. Every hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I stumbled back toward my truck, slipping on the icy road in my panic. I scrambled into the cab and slammed the door, locking it behind me. My breath fogged the windshield as I sat there, gripping the wheel with white knuckles, staring down at the wreckage. That's when I noticed the headlights below flicker. At first, I thought it was the snow playing tricks on my eyes. But then they flickered again, and the entire truck cab shimmered like a mirage. 1 second it was there, smashed and buried in the snow, and the next it was gone. Just gone. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the ravine, right where I'd been moments before. It was tall and shadowy, its features obscured by the swirling snow. But its eyes were bright, piercing through the darkness and staring straight at me. I didn't think. I just turned the key in the ignition, gunned the engine, and took off. The figure didn't move, but I swear I could feel its gaze burning into my back as I drove away. The CB crackled again, and my blood turned to ice. "Don't leave me," the voice said. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My hands were trembling so badly, I could barely keep the wheel steady. The voice kept talking, growing louder and more frantic. "Don't leave me here. Don't leave me alone." I reached for the CB mic, intending to turn the damn thing off, but then the voice changed. It wasn't faint or garbled anymore. It wasn't even desperate. It was my voice. "Please," it said, pleading. "Don't leave me. I need your help." I slammed the mic back into its holder and floored the gas, my tires skidding on the icy road. The voice continued, growing louder and more distorted. It echoed inside the cab, overlapping itself, filling my head with static and whispers and that horrible, familiar tone. And then I heard the laughter. It was low and hollow, vibrating through the speakers and rattling my teeth. The headlights flickered, the engine sputtered, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I thought the truck was going to die. When the CB crackled again, the voice was cold and flat, all traces of desperation gone. "You shouldn't have stopped," it said, and the laughter rose again, drowning out everything else. I don't remember much after that. Somehow, I made it down the mountain pass and onto the main highway, where the snow finally started to let up. By the time I reached the nearest truck stop, the sun was coming up, painting the horizon in shades of pink and orange. But even in the daylight, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I haven't used my CB radio since that night. It's still in my truck gathering dust, but I'll never turn it on again. If you're out there, driving the highways, and you hear a voice calling for help over the radio, do yourself a favor. Don't answer. Story 3. The rest stop. It's common knowledge. Never stay too long at an abandoned rest stop. If you've been a trucker long enough, you've heard the stories. Some folks say it's superstition, others call it survival instinct. Either way, I learned the hard way why that rule exists. I was halfway through a cross-country haul, somewhere in Kansas, and exhaustion had finally caught up with me. The clock on the dash read 3:14 a.m., and my eyes felt like sandpaper. I'd passed a couple of rest areas earlier, but they were full of RVs and idling trucks, and I just wanted some peace and quiet to catch a few hours of sleep. So when I spotted a faded blue sign that read "Rest Stop, 1 mile," I figured I'd give it a shot. The turnoff led to a narrow, cracked road that twisted into the dark. When I pulled into the parking lot, my headlights swept over rows of empty spaces, weeds growing through the asphalt. The place was eerily silent, and the dim fluorescent lights above the restrooms flickered weakly. It wasn't the kind of rest stop most people would feel comfortable in, but I wasn't in the mood to be picky. I parked my truck at the far end of the lot, away from the restroom building, and killed the engine. The cab fell into an almost oppressive silence, broken only by the faint creak of the wind pushing against my trailer. I leaned back in my seat, pulling my hat down over my eyes. Just a quick nap? I told myself I'd be back on the road by sunrise. But sleep didn't come easy. Something about the place felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. My truck usually creaked and groaned as it settled. But tonight, it felt like the entire rig was holding its breath. I don't know how long I drifted in and out, but I was jolted awake by a loud thump on the roof of my cab. My eyes shot open, heart pounding. I sat up, listening. Another thump. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon or a bird. But the sound was too deliberate, like footsteps. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove box and stepped outside. The cold air hit me like a slap, and I shivered as I aimed the beam up at the cab roof. Nothing, just the faint outline of frost glistening in the light. Shaking my head, I climbed back inside and locked the doors. I was probably just imagining things. Too tired, too paranoid. That's what I told myself. Anyway, I was about to settle back into my seat when I noticed them. Handprints. They were smeared across the inside of my windshield, long fingers trailing down the glass like someone had dragged their hands across it. My stomach twisted. I turned around, shining my flashlight into the sleeper cabin behind me, but it was empty. My bedding was untouched, my duffel bag still zipped up. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was louder now, rhythmic, like something was stomping across the roof. My hands shook as I turned the flashlight upward, pointing it at the ceiling of the cab. I could see the faintest impression of movement, dents forming in the metal, as if something heavy was pacing back and forth. I threw the truck into gear and hit the gas, my tires screeching against the pavement as I sped out of the lot. The thumping stopped the second I hit the main road. For a while, I thought I'd escaped whatever it was. The highway was empty, the stars overhead faint through the early morning haze. I told myself it was just fatigue, a half-dream conjured by my overworked brain. But then I saw it. In my rear-view mirror, the trailer lights flickered, casting brief glimpses of something moving behind me. At first, I thought it was shadows, but the shapes were too solid, too deliberate. They darted back and forth, faster than anything should be able to move. I didn't stop, couldn't stop. My hands were glued to the wheel, my eyes flicking between the road ahead and the mirror behind me. By the time dawn broke, I was nearing a small truck stop just off the interstate. I pulled into the parking lot and jumped out of the cab, desperate to put some distance between myself and the trailer. That's when I noticed the rest stop, or rather, the lack of it. I should have been 100 miles away by now, but when I turned back toward the highway, the forest looked wrong. Thick, overgrown trees covered the horizon where there should have been open plains. The rest stop I'd left hours ago was nowhere to be seen. I walked around to the back of the trailer, my pulse racing. It was empty, completely empty. I'd picked up my load in Kansas City, heavy construction materials that had been chained down and double-checked by the crew. But now, the inside of the trailer was bare, the walls smeared with streaks of frost and something else. Handprints, dozens of them, crisscrossing the walls and ceiling. I backed away, my heart pounding. I turned to get back into the cab, but as I reached for the door, I froze. The thumping was back, louder now, more frantic. I climbed into the cab and slammed the door, my breath fogging the windshield as I fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, but before I could pull away, my eyes locked on the windshield. The handprints were back. They were fresh this time, streaking down the glass in slow, deliberate motions. The frost from the early morning air clung to the prints, and as I watched, they began to form letters. 3 words. Don't stop. The thumping stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I don't remember much after that. Just driving. Endlessly, aimlessly, until the sun was high enough to chase away the shadows. I don't use rest stops anymore. Not the empty ones, anyway. If you ever see one, keep driving. You might think you need sleep, but trust me, it's not worth it. Story 4. The highway loop. The dispatcher swore the delivery was just 2 hours away. A straight shot down Route 17, a small drop-off, and then I could call it a night. Easy money. But no one could explain why I kept ending up at the same damn diner, over and over again. It started out like any other run. I left the depot at sunset, hauling a load of perishables down to a small grocery store just over the state line. The road was empty, just the way I liked it. The sky a dark purple streaked with faint stars. About an hour in, I saw it, a brightly lit diner on the side of the road, its neon sign flickering Darla's Diner. Open 24 hours. It looked like something straight out of the 1950s, complete with chrome trim and a few cars parked out front. I wasn't hungry, but the coffee was wearing off, and a quick bathroom break sounded like a good idea. Inside, the place was warm and smelled like stale fry grease. The waitress behind the counter greeted me with a tired but friendly smile. Just passing through? She asked as she poured me a cup of coffee. Yep, long haul. I replied, glancing at the clock above the counter. It read 9:45 p.m. The place wasn't busy, just a couple of other patrons sitting in booths, chatting quietly. I downed my coffee, thanked the waitress, and got back on the road. That's when things got strange. About 20 minutes later, the headlights swept across something familiar. Darla's Diner. I frowned, checking the GPS. It showed I was still heading straight down Route 17, right where I should have been. But there it was, the same diner, the same flickering neon sign, the same 3 cars in the lot. I pulled over and stared at it for a moment, my stomach tightening. Maybe I just zoned out and taken a wrong turn, ended up doubling back somehow. That happens sometimes when you drove long hours. Your brain drifted, and suddenly you were where you started. Shaking it off, I got back on the highway. This time, I kept my eyes peeled for any signs or landmarks to make sure I wasn't looping. But another 20 minutes passed, and there it was again. Darla's Diner. The same parking lot. The same 3 cars. Even the same flickering "Oh" in the neon sign. I didn't stop this time. I drove right past, my pulse racing. My GPS insisted I was still on track, but the unease in my chest was growing. The road ahead stretched endlessly into the dark, with no turn-offs, no intersections, nothing but the same black ribbon of asphalt cutting through an increasingly barren landscape. 30 minutes later, I was back at the diner. This time, I pulled in. The only thing I could think was that maybe I'd missed something, a sign, a detour, anything that would explain why I kept circling back. Inside, the diner looked exactly the same, down to the clock on the wall, which still read 9:45 p.m. The waitress looked up from behind the counter, smiling like she'd never seen me before. "Just passing through?" she asked, pouring me another cup of coffee. I stared at her, my mouth dry. "You asked me that earlier," I said. She tilted her head, her smile faltering. "What do you mean? You just got here." The other patrons, 2 men in a booth near the back, turned to look at me. Their faces seemed wrong, somehow, not in an obvious way, but off. Their eyes were too dark, too shiny, their smiles too wide. "I've been here before," I said, louder now. "This is the 3rd time I've stopped here. Something's not right." The waitress's smile didn't waver. "You must be mistaken, Han," she said, her tone syrupy sweet. I didn't respond. I grabbed my coffee, tossed a bill onto the counter, and bolted for the door. Back in the truck, I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The GPS still insisted I was heading the right way, but I didn't trust it anymore. I didn't trust anything. The road stretched ahead, impossibly long and empty, the surrounding landscape fading into darkness. Even the trees seemed to thin out, replaced by jagged silhouettes that looked more like skeletal hands reaching toward the sky. The air in the cab grew colder. I turned the heater up, but it didn't help. My breath started to fog the windshield. An hour passed, or maybe 10 minutes. I don't know anymore. And then I saw it. Again, Darla's Diner. This time, the neon sign wasn't flickering. It was dead, the parking lot empty, the windows dark. I pulled into the lot, heart hammering in my chest, and climbed out of the truck. The air was thick and heavy, pressing against me like an invisible weight. Inside, the diner was empty. No waitress, no patrons, just a few overturned chairs and a thick layer of dust covering the counter. The clock on the wall was stopped at 9:45 p.m. I turned back to the truck, and that's when I saw them. The passenger seats inside the cab were full. 3 figures slumped over, their faces pale and shriveled, their hollow eyes staring straight ahead. My legs nearly gave out as I stumbled backward, gasping for air. The corpses were familiar. One was wearing the same uniform as the waitress. Another looked like one of the men from the booth. And the third was me. I ran to the cab and flung the door open, but the corpses were gone. The seats were empty, the cab cold and silent. I jumped inside and started the engine, desperate to get the hell out of there. The headlights lit up the road ahead, but as I shifted into gear, the diner appeared in front of me again. This time, it was closer. I slammed the truck into reverse, but it was no use. The diner loomed larger, its windows glowing faintly, the neon sign sputtering back to life. The last thing I saw before the headlights failed was my own reflection in the diner window. It was smiling. I don't know how long I've been driving now. The odometer hasn't moved in hours. The GPS just shows a blank map, the marker spinning in circles. If you're on Route 17 and you see a diner called Darla's, keep driving. Whatever you do, don't stop. Story 5. The light in the rear view. Truckers call it the Watcher, a strange light that follows drivers on desolate stretches of highway, usually in the Midwest. It's one of those campfire stories you hear at truck stops between shifts, passed around by guys trying to one-up each other with the weirdest, creepiest tale they've got. I always thought it was just that, a story, something truckers made up to pass the time. I never believed in it, not until I saw the light in my rearview mirror. It started on a routine overnight run. I was hauling a shipment of produce through Nebraska, endless miles of flatland under a starless sky. There was no moon that night, just the cold, dark highway stretching into nothing. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. I was halfway through my shift, sipping cold coffee to stay awake when I first noticed it. A light in the distance behind me, just a single white headlight. It wasn't unusual. Other trucks and cars passed through these roads, even late at night. But something about this one felt strange. The light stayed exactly the same size, no matter how far I drove or how fast I went. It didn't get closer, didn't fall back, just hung there, steady and constant, like it was tethered to me. I glanced at the side mirror. There were no outlines of a vehicle, no movement, just the faint white glow of the headlight. Must be a motorcycle, I muttered, trying to brush off the unease creeping up my spine. I sped up, pushing my rig a little harder than usual, watching the speedometer climb. The light didn't change. It matched me mile for mile, its brightness unflinching. "All right, buddy," I muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. "You want to tailgate me all night, huh?" I flicked on my high beams, hoping the glare might discourage whoever it was, but when I checked the mirror again, my stomach dropped. The light wasn't just behind me anymore. It was higher, floating above the road, far too high for any motorcycle or car. It pulsed faintly, flickering in and out like it was watching me. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was some kind of aircraft, a low-flying drone, something explainable. But the stories I'd heard started clawing their way into my mind. The Watcher. The guys at the truck stop said it followed you, matched your speed, that it wasn't a headlight or a drone or anything man-made, and that if you stopped, if you let it catch you, well, no one knew what happened after that. I told myself it was just a coincidence, some highway trick of the light. But the further I drove, the worse the feeling got. The light began to flicker more, erratically now, like it was trying to get my attention. My radio, which had been playing static-filled country music, cut out completely. Just dead silence. Then the whispers started. At first, I thought it was the wind pushing against the cab, but as the sound grew louder, I realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the speakers, faint and distorted like voices just on the edge of hearing. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I swear to God, they were whispering my name. "All right," I said out loud, my voice shaking. "Enough of this." I yanked the wheel hard to the right, pulling off the highway onto an old gravel road. The tires crunched as I turned and turned again, trying to lose the light. But it followed me. No matter how many twists and turns I took, it was there, steady, unwavering, always in my rear view. The whispers grew louder, overlapping now, an unintelligible chorus that set my teeth on edge. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I pulled onto the shoulder of the road, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. The silence was deafening. I sat there for a moment, staring into the rearview mirror. The light was gone. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last long. Something about the quiet felt wrong. I climbed out of the cab, flashlight in hand, and walked around to the back of the trailer. My breath fogged the air as I unlocked the doors, each click of the latch echoing in the stillness. The flashlight beam swept over the inside of the trailer, illuminating crates of produce stacked neatly against the walls. Everything looked normal, nothing out of place, and yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That's when I saw it. The light. It wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the trailer, hovering just above the crates. It wasn't blinding. It was soft, almost inviting, but it pulsed with a strange rhythm, like a heartbeat. I stepped back, my flashlight flickering as the light grew brighter. Suddenly, the trailer doors slammed shut. I stumbled, nearly dropping the flashlight, and bolted back to the cab. My breath came in ragged gasps as I climbed inside and locked the doors. The engine roared to life, but as I shifted into gear, I realized something was wrong. The light was inside the cab now. It engulfed the interior, filling every corner with a blinding, white glow. I couldn't see the wheel, the dashboard, or my own hands. I felt someone grip my shoulder, and then I saw it. In the side mirror, just for a second, I caught a glimpse of the truck. My truck, but I wasn't the one driving it. It was me, or something that looked like me, its eyes glowing with the same eerie white light that filled the cab. It grinned, a wide, unnatural smile that stretched too far across its face. I screamed, the sound swallowed by the light, and then I don't remember anything after that. When I came to, I was parked on the side of the highway, the sun rising in the distance. The trailer was empty. The crates of produce were gone, but the walls were scorched, blackened with strange, circular patterns. The odometer read 0. My GPS was blank. I haven't told anyone about what happened that night. I can barely even make sense of it myself, but sometimes, when I'm out on the road, I'll catch a glimpse of something in my rear view. A faint light, flickering just on the edge of the horizon. If you see it, don't stop. Don't look. Just drive. Because once it sees you, it never lets go. Thanks for watching. If you like the story, click like, subscribe to the channel, and write an idea for the next story in the comments.